Greetings, fellow Arkansmiths. I'm James Smith with Knights of the Smith Dinner Table, coming back with another episode of my Tips and Tricks series. Today we're going to talk about all the changes that have recently happened in the UI that Nathan has put out in just the past couple of weeks. So without further ado, let's hop right in. So first and foremost, let me bring my palette tool back up. First thing you're going to notice is this is not changed. So your your map directory is completely the same. The big changes start first right here on the sides. So as you notice, these are now locked in place and they are on either side. They're very thin. They're very much out of the way now. On the left side, you still have the same thing. You've got the toggle the palette tool. You've got the toggle the DM player view. You have showing the locks on the overlay. And then you have the map rotation. Now here, the map rotation button map rotation tool has gotten much smaller. So it's going to be a little bit different than what it was before, and hopefully they're going to add a slider bar to that soon. Now over on the right, we've got our home map browser. This takes you straight here without having to have your palette tool open or change your palette tool tab. The grid settings, this actually itself hasn't changed, and as of right now, the slider tool is only exactly that, a slider tool. You have your eraser tool. So let me shut off the palette for a second. You click on this and this now appears right here, and then you select the objects that you want to erase. The other nice thing is right here, this is the new level indicator, and as you go it will populate farther and farther. I've seen lots of people ask in Discord if they accidentally create a level, like say I do this and it creates this level here. If you don't put anything on it, when you save your map and reload, it won't be there, so no big deal if you create extra levels in height or depth. But that pretty much covers what's new right here on the main screen without the palette tool. When we go to the palette tool, the first thing here is, much like the sides, it has that much cleaner, crisper look to it. It also has a few extra features added. So the options tab really hasn't changed, but we'll come back to that in a minute because I want to discuss some of the advanced settings. Up here on the object tool, everything is looking nicer. One of the big changes is that he set it up so that way everything alphabetizes for your presets. Now the objects inside won't necessarily alphabetize yet. Hopefully that's coming in the future, but as of right now, it can still be a little helter-skelter as you open these. So you'll still have to search manually until we get an actual search tool. The other thing is right here, when you click up here on the type, you can still use the arrows to go either direction, just like that. Or you can click here and the drop-down menu has become much larger. So you don't have to scroll to get down to, say, before it would only show like tiles and objects. You might see the very top of repeatables and you have to scroll down. Now it's much wider, or it's much deeper. It allows you to see more of your different types of assets. Sorry, I'm having a hard time with words this morning. Under lighting, this is pretty much the same. I mean, we still have the enable dynamic lighting automatically update. You can force the updates. The big change here is that your light barriers for when you import a map, like say you import a map from a PDF, from a published adventure, and you don't feel like building it by hand, or you need something quick, you can place the light barriers here. And this has been moved here because it just makes more sense to have it under light settings. Now, once you place the barriers, you still cannot select them. You have to use the eraser tool to get them, and that setting is right there. You just click there. So if I do place barriers, place a barrier. If I want to erase it, just that easy. All right, move my palette tool back. One of the other nice things about here on the front is the side things are much smaller than what they used to be, giving us a lot more real estate to work with when we're making our maps. Portals haven't changed. You can still set your start point, add bookmarks. That really hasn't changed significantly. My last episode, I discussed the fog of war and the new line of sight workaround that we have right now. But one of the big changes there is he renamed it from persistent fog to dynamic fog. So if you want it to be open, like when the line of sight clears it, and you don't want it to backfill behind it, so that way it closes back in around the party as they're moving around, then you leave that unchecked. If you want it to fill back in, like say they're underground, you don't want them to see the map, the sections that they've left behind, you click dynamic fog, and then it will do that whole closing the fog back around them as they move. Audio, no real major changes here. Zones, this has not been built in yet. And then we're back to settings. Under the settings, we've got the advanced settings here. These are the different map options. So one of the big things is, and I always recommend this, if you have anything below the main level of the map, make sure you always disable shadows from upper levels. If it's just a one level map, you can have it disabled and the roofs that you have will actually cast shadows down on the levels below. It gets a little weird when you get down to the sub levels because for some reason level 0 does not block light from going down to level -1. So it's not acting like ground. So the shadows from like 3rd or 4th level up will actually show in the underground. That's a change I know is in the works, but I don't think it's going to be until version 0.5. So you can darken the lower levels. So if you're up above and you can see down below, that actually darkens them so you can tell the difference between the map level that you're on and the map levels below. Hide lower levels. This is for when you have, excuse me, for when you have a slower machine or a machine that can't quite keep up. If you hide the lower levels, it'll stop rendering everything that's below. And now with one of the recent updates, if you have video maps or things like that on different levels, you click hide lower levels, and whichever level you're on, everything below it, the video stops playing and it no longer eats up resources. So you can throw as many video maps as you want on as many levels as you want. Go to town. Show upper level. Now, I know a lot of you have seen my shipwreck map. This is what I use for showing the water down on the level below where the shipwreck is. That way when the party's down below, they've got the waves coming over top and I can still interact with their tokens without messing with the animated assets that are above them. Grid behind objects. Discussed this before. This actually moves the grid, rather than being on top of everything, it moves it down to just above the tile level, the ground level, so to speak, where you put your floors, your ground, your dirt, all of that. It just sits on top of the tiling rather than on top of the objects. And it's really nice because it makes everything sort of pop and it makes it much easier to read your map. Doesn't look like you're looking through a fence at your map anymore. Snap by default. And this is, and let me bring up an object. We'll go to something that is going to be fairly quick to load. So if you notice, my hand is right here. Here's my mouse hand. Everything is snapping to the grid without me having to hold control. This is great for building walls. If you want to build walls along the grid, works great because then you don't have to hold control to do everything. I still do because at this point in the game, it's force of habit. So if you wanted everything to snap automatically to the grid, you just select snap to grid. Got your autosave, and then you can change the background color. So this was the original default color. We can now do a much darker gray, black, and white, which is glaringly bright. I'm not a big fan of the white. And then another new feature. If you get a map where you don't have the pack that has assets in it, it's going to come up, it's going to pop up an error, and it's going to tell you what assets are missing as well as what pack they're from. I think it still does that. It may not. I haven't had that issue in a while. But when you have it pop up to warn you, hey, autosave. If you have it pop up and it warns you, and these are assets that you don't want anymore, you can click on this button right here, clear unused tiles. And what that does is anything that's missing because it's not in the current pack setup that you have, it will wipe those out. And then the next time you load, you won't get that error. Those are all the advanced map options. So, and that pretty much covers that. Once again, you got the hotkeys, which if you're new, I highly recommend taking this and docking it either up here or down here or somewhere that's out of your way so you can just do a quick glance until you get to know all the hotkeys. Import media, export maps. I'm going to actually talk about export maps real quick. So I know that there's a lot of people who are wanting to export. And here, when you click export maps, it's going to expand it out just like it did. We've got a couple of options for exporting. You got the PDF export, which makes the printable pages for those of you who like to have just the sheets of paper to place down for your maps. You've got the image export, which exports it as a PNG. And then when you're actually selecting it, you do this, and this is where a lot of people get a little confused, is you do that, it doesn't actually select anything until you come up here and you do this, and then it highlights everything in purple that you just selected. Then you can click export. Up here you can change the DPI. It defaults to 120 just because currently all the other VTTs out there, virtual tabletops, cap out at 120. ArkenForge's Masters Toolkit is the only one that's 256 natively. Exporting is pretty easy. I do it for maps that I'm making for other people, so that way I can just send them an image and then they can fill it in. Or if they don't have Toolkit, they can print it off or whatever they want to do. All right, so back to objects. Couple of changes here is anything that has a slider bar, with the exception of the grid right now, you can right click and change the settings. So if I don't like that brush size, it's currently defaulting at 4, I can change it to 2, hit enter, and then change it to brush. Oops, it did not change to brush. And it changes the size. Same with object density. That right there is just a 0.97 object density, and it throws a lot. Oops, wrong thing. So you can go through and I'm having issues. I apologize. You can go through and change the size of the brush by right clicking, and any slider bar that pops up a number you can now right click on, input the new value that you want to use, and it goes great. 2 things to remember with this. Don't use special characters like the exclamation point, question mark, the period you can use because that's the decimal point. However, any of the others you can't really use. Don't use letters because it won't recognize letters. Now, it's not going to crash. I don't believe it'll crash the system or anything, but it won't recognize it. There are two things here. If you put in a number that is smaller than the lowest number you can go to on the slider, in this case the 0.5, it's going to bottom out and it will stop at 0.5. So if I put in, like, let me change this back up to 1.5, which is the max, so it's capped out. If I go in here and I put in 0.25, it bottoms out at the 0.5, and the opposite is true as well. So if I decide, oh, let's hit 5, it caps it at 1.5. So don't worry about putting in a number too large, too small. It'll cap it at either end. One of the other cool things that was added with this. Now, if you remember in a video that I did not too long ago about tiling and brushing your objects on, and how if you hold the shift button down, it'll randomly place the object. So like if I hold down shift, if you notice these objects, let me zoom in so you can see different hues, different brightnesses, different positions. And that is all great, and it does the same thing if you do the tile. So, whoops. Does the tile, that's the regular, so if I hold down the shift, does the weird thing there, and right now I have the object density crazy high. So, while that does that, if you now go to single and say I want to place a single one, so without holding the shift, it goes in exactly like the picture down here. If I hold shift, and if you look, it changes its position. And each one that I click and add, it's randomized. So that is a nice new feature, so that way everything doesn't look exactly perfect, and then you don't have to spend a lot of time changing the position, colors. You can just, if you feel like just being random, you can let it be random. So that covers that minor new feature. Let's go over to repeatables. So with repeatables, there's several changes now. So the new default is, whoops, I was making the video before and it got messed up, but the new default is somewhere around 0.4. And what that means is that when you go in and you default it, this is going to be the size of your line. Excuse me. Now, that's all fine and dandy. However, if you want the original size default walls, right click here, and the number that you're looking for is 0.1875. This gives us the nice size walls that we had before. This is the original size. Nathan did the math to figure it out. And the big change that happened here is no longer are walls being measured in the Unity engine measurement lengths, whatever those are. Now they're being measured in squares. So this is 0.0185 or 0.18. I apologize. This is 0.1875 squares. So if we put a bunch of them next to each of them takes up that much of a square. It's important to note that the measurement here for your wall width, your repeatable width, or as it's called now, line width, is exactly equal to squares. So if I want a wall that is exactly 1 square in width, I come here, and voila, the wall is exactly 1 square in width. If I want to go big or go home, zoom it all the way out to 4, and I am holding control so that way it'll snap. I should have enabled snap to grid. If you look here, now the wall starts from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's exactly 4 wide. Now this is great because it makes figuring out the size of your walls a metric ton easier. There's no guesswork involved. There's no, oh, let's see how this looks and then go, it's not quite right, delete it, come back, do that again. Now you can get the exact measurements, which is phenomenally helpful. And that in the future is going to be one of those things where it's going to be one of the big game changers because a lot of the other tools still aren't real precise like that. So moving on from there, we're going to come to, let's go back to objects. Actually, no, let's go to animated first because this is something that I almost missed. Nathan buried it in one of the patch notes. So previously, we had our wonderful little animated objects. You could click lock the tile, but it would not lock the tile before. So now if you click lock tile, deselect and just try and click, the animation is no longer clickable, which is exactly what it needs to be. Instead, you have to either turn this on and deactivate it, or you have to hold down Shift and click to select it, which means that we can place our animations with no fear of accidentally picking them up for those of us who use tokens. That's great, especially I know some of you have seen my maps from my previous live streams, which I plan to pick back up now that my work schedule seems to be slowing back down. But you've seen where I've put the animations in and everything, and those animations, especially when I make them large, can be a real pain in the rear when I'm moving tokens around. So now I can have my tokens underneath the animations and things like that without having to worry about accidentally grabbing the animations. And further, it goes on to help everybody else who does the same thing that I do with them with tokens. So back to objects. Not only did we get the, for the brushing tools, we are, let's use this. All right, because this is going to be a real easy one to see it on. So we have our object. We have our manipulation. Now, just like the slider bars, we now can right click and put in the value number. So we can go through, change all the values, and once again, it caps out at the top and bottom. Don't worry about putting anything in too big. Don't use alphas. Don't use special characters other than the period. So this will let us say if I don't like the brightness where it's at, I can cut it in half and it gets darker. If I decide I didn't like it, I can go back to 50 and it's back to what it was. Same with the saturation, the opacity, and all of that. Mirror options, no new mirror options there. However, there is another really nice thing for objects, especially when it comes to lighting. So if we give it light, and we're going to change the light to 8 just because. And let me change the dynamic lighting to 1. That is way too bright. Let's go back to 4. All right, let me move this. So as you can see, it's shedding the light. Right now it's doing that really weird light thing, and I apologize for that. But if I don't like the current color of light, you click here, and now we have lots of options. Before you had this really small color palette. Now, got this really large color palette. Even better, when you're hovering over it, it has the tooltip for the RGB. So if you select the color, like say I want to do that, it has the RGB now. If I know the RGB of what I want to use, I can input it directly. So if I wanted to say 15, it changes the hue. If I want to go 0, changes the hue of the light. And also, for those people who have all the extra time to learn all the hex codes, if you know the exact hex code of the color that you want, you can put the hex code here. And if you don't know, so like say I do this, you can do this, Control C, and say I want to create another object with that exact light. So we come to here, drop it here, give it some light, click here, Control V, confirm. And if you look, exact same color. This is important in that it makes it extremely simple for us to now exactly match light hues. Going to be have a lot more consistency when you're building your map. So if you got a bunch of blue lights in a room, they're all the same color and you don't have this weird, slightly off thing. And in all honesty, only players with extreme senses of color differentiation are going to notice it. I do because I'm OCD. I know that there are other people out there that the same thing. If they don't have the exact same color match, it kind of bothers them. And then it could slightly ruin it for them. But honestly, it's just a really nice tool to have. Beyond that, I honestly can't think of anything else that I really need to cover today. I just wanted to go over the big UI things. We'll come back here, hop into the settings, just a few more things. For those of you who are still new to this, when you're setting everything up, make sure that under your settings here, your secondary screen is detected before you even try and start it. Select the screen that you're going to use. If it's just a 2-screen setup, you don't have to worry about that. You can put your height and width in, and make sure you're using the right units. The reason I say this is because us Americans, for some reason, our government is still stuck on the old imperial system. So everything is inches for us. Everything we buy here is inches, which is really weird because our mechanics, our scientists, and our medical people all work in metric. Then you can activate your player screen. Audio, this controls the UI sounds. So whenever you click on something, it's going to make a little boop sound. I'm not a big fan of it, so I turn it all the way down. And then accounts, this is for anything that's linked to it. Like in this case right now, just the Sirenscape. Yes, I know you can see my token ID. However, the token ID actually stretches to somewhere out here, so you can't see enough of it to be able to use mine. Don't worry about it. We're good. All right. Other than that, there's really not a whole lot else to cover. I mean, scenario, not a whole lot of changes in it recently. I already went over some of them previously. Cartographer we've done. Worlds, no changes to that. So I think I'm going to wrap it up for today. Coming in about 20-ish minutes or so. Beyond that, if you like what I've done, subscribe, like, share, point other people to my videos. The more people we can help out with this, the more people that will tend to like this, the more that the toolkit will grow. Our community is getting big. Our community is amazing. Let's keep it that way. And other than that, everybody have a great day, and I will see you at the next episode.